Everyone. Good to meet the on-time, very punctual crew of folks. I think we'll give folks another maybe minute or two and then get started. Does that sound okay, Ishida? Great.
Perfect.
Maybe while we're waiting, if you want to type in the chat, maybe a job title you are hoping to to land, just so I know what sort of focus people have and one thing you're hoping to get out of the workshop. Feel free to type that in as we wait, and then we'll get started in a bit. Couple software engineers, nice. Mechanical engineer, love it. Client success, business development, great. Adding some variety to the mix. Technical writer, for any kind of work involving translating, nice. Something in the data field, data space, like it. Cool. I think got a decent number, so I'll probably go ahead and get started. I will start by sharing my screen. Great. Well, thanks and welcome everyone to the Terra Climate Job Search Workshop. My name is Eric Lee. I was Salamander's LFA alumni, so good to be back and seeing all of these lovely faces, and appreciate all of y'all joining. I think everyone can see my screen, but I'll jump right in and step through a number of sort of the agenda, introduce myself, and then dive right in. We do have time to answer questions as we go, so feel free to interrupt me by raising your hand or typing in the chat itself. But with that, I will hop on in, and yeah, excited to be with all of you this morning. So I'll do a quick introduction, briefly touch on why I work on climate, but everyone here is part of Terra, so we'll move through that quickly. We'll then get into some resume cover letter tips. Next, figure out where you fit in climate, and then talk about how to set up a sustainable job search. And again, all throughout, feel free to answer or ask any questions that you have. Jumping on in, like I said, my name is Eric. I started my career in consulting, somehow became a resume cover letter job search nerd, and currently am a work in product at Afresh. So Afresh is a climate tech company with the mission to eliminate food waste and make fresh food available for everyone. I graduated from Terra earlier this year, based in SF, and enjoy tennis, travel, and new recipes. And I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, so it's my wife and I in front of the Shire in New Zealand and all of that. But that is a bit about me, and we'll continue forward. So in terms of why I work on climate, we'll move through this quickly, but I assume many of y'all have attended Dr. Chip Fletcher's talk, but it's critical to work on climate because the need is urgent. The trajectory that we need to achieve in cutting emissions is very, very steep. And so the more people working in climate and getting involved earlier, the more likely we are to make that happen. And the other second reason to work on climate is because it's frankly good for your career. So the transformation required to go from our current primarily fossil fuel oriented economy to a more sustainable economy is going to touch every single sector. And Depending on who you ask, there's always some order of hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars that will need to be spent in this transition, and just rapidly increasing growth in climate tech funding, startup funding, investment in many, many sectors. Assume there's no big surprises or anything here, but if there's any questions, please chime in. Otherwise, we'll keep on going to resumes and cover letters. So in this area, I think there's 4 areas that I'll speak to. So first is just starting with the job description, making sure you are laying a strong foundation and starting with a good understanding. 2, I'll then talk through a few ways to make sure you're highlighting your relevant experiences front and center, share a few tips for how to incorporate keywords, and then share a formula for how to quantify your accomplishments in what you're doing in the resume. So I think first tip is fairly straightforward, but it does all start here. So, step 1, you need to really make sure you understand the job descriptions for the roles that you're applying to. So find a handful of job descriptions, review it, and understand what is mentioned first, what is mentioned most frequently, what skills and keywords are coming up. And really, by the end of this, you should have a really clear short list of these are the skills and keywords that I'm seeing over and over again across the companies and roles titles that I'm looking at. Sure, most of you all know this, so I'll keep on going. But I think the second tip, once you have that understanding, is that you really want to connect and shape your resume so that the relevant experiences are as close to the top and as evident as possible. So I think the first traditional way to do this is that at the top of a resume, you start with a summary, and then you might go through your professional experiences in reverse chronological order. But I think for many folks on this call, if you're trying to transition from one industry to another or one role to another, your most recent role might not actually be what is the most relevant, or there might be some distance between that. And so I think a second method that I would encourage folks to consider is essentially to have a separate section at the top titled relevant skills and experiences, or have a section titled that basically lets you highlight the most relevant experiences and bullets, regardless of where they came in your career. So I think this is powerful in that it saves the recruiter or the person reading your resume time. Instead of having to find the 3 relevant experiences across 3 different roles, you really just pull it all up to the top, and you make a much stronger first impression by just distilling the most relevant pieces up at the top of the resume. Nice, more folks joining. Sounds good. Any questions or comments, or keep on going? Happy to keep on trucking here. Okay, we'll keep on going. Next sort of resume tip to share is that it's really important to incorporate relevant keywords and skills throughout. I think incorporating keywords in the summary and skills section of resumes, if you have those sections, is pretty straightforward. But I think the part that I want to speak a little bit more about is a concept called keyword framing. So again, for folks who are transitioning careers or trying to connect what you do with what you want to do, there's a really powerful method called keyword framing, where at the start of each bullet, not only do you have an action-oriented verb, but you prepend a keyword from job descriptions at the front of each bullet. And what this does for a reader is, again, is a couple things. 1, it makes your resume more keyword rich. 2, it sort of frames the bullet or your experience in a way that is directly connected to something that is relevant in the resume. So in the job description, rather. This is really around framing, priming, and encouraging a reader to view your experience in the way you want it to be viewed. Because what can often happen is, if you just have your experience, there might be an analytics part of the experience, there might be an engineering part of it, there might be an operational part of it. But if the part that you really need to convince the reader about is operations, then put that at the start of that bullet, tailor the bullet according to that. And I think this is a powerful way to really make it easy for a recruiter to read down your resume, see the keywords that are relevant, and to also interpret and view your experiences in a way that is closely tied to the job description, instead of them having to connect the dots and do more mental work on their own. And last but not least, on the resume side of things, it is very, very important to quantify the impact of your accomplishments. So I think the vast majority, this is, I think, very common to see resumes that do a great job of saying, these were my responsibilities, this is what I did, but actually what's most important and I think impactful to recruiters looking at your resume is what impact you had and why what you did actually mattered. And so a good formula for doing this is achieved X as measured by Y by doing Z. So you're leading with the impact, how you measured it, and then only at the end are you talking about how you did it. There are a couple of examples here, but I think there's many ways to get creative about quantifying as well. So there's money, there's time, there's product metrics, there's user satisfaction, there's people and team metrics, and all of those things I think lend a lot more, can make your resume bullets a lot more compelling, and going from vague to specific also is quite powerful. And yeah, in terms of quantifying, lead with the results, consider the impact not just that you made, but the broader impact to the team and company, and also consider time horizon. So don't just think about, I did this one time, but if what you've done in your current roles has had a recurring benefit, keep that in mind and factor that in as well. Standard resume involving all of the areas. Yeah, that's a great segue. It's almost like you knew what was coming up next. So here's a sample resume. And so if you click here, this is a Google Doc resume template that has, formatting, a couple of examples of templates that you can use here. And when you click the link, you won't have direct edit access, so you'll have to do file, make a copy. But this resume template has sort of a section for keywords at the top, a section to highlight your most relevant bullets, sections for the template already has the keyword framing built in, suggestions for where you might mention Terra, but that is in this deck, and I believe Terra will be sending this out after the session. Any other questions on resume before we continue ahead? Yeah, and I can also just share this whole slide deck now with everyone who's on this, just so it's easier for reference. Any resume questions before we move on to cover letter? Simple formats as opposed to visually appealing graphics. That's a great question. Matthew, what industry are you in again?
I'm in technology.
Okay.
I have an IT firm, and yeah, I'm looking to go into the transportation mobility sector.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, so I think the answer it's a good question, and it's a common one that gets asked. I think generally the response is very industry specific. So I think if you were more in a design or creative function, I think a less traditional visual appealing resume, I think would be completely fine and appropriate for that sort of role. I think in general, my recommendation, if you're not in a more creative functional role, is to keep it more standardized and simplified. It's not the most exciting and sexiest approach, but conventions are powerful, and that, being recognizable, the value there is really that it makes it easier and quicker and less work for a recruiter to find and scan through to your resume to understand what your background is. I think for creative resumes that have 2 or 3 columns or that put information in areas that are not conventional, you risk making the recruiter work for or miss the relevant experience or the time or the bullet that would have made the difference. So that's generally a rule of thumb. If you're in a more creative space, I think having some more of that creativity and visual flair is completely fine. Otherwise, being a little more restrained, reserved can be a good safe bet. And Rosie, how can we include Terra in training? You mentioned Terra and other relevant organizations' courses. Yeah, let me go through that. So I think where you put Terra may vary depending on if you're a recent grad, if you're using it to explain a break in employment or gaps in that way. So the exact placement, there isn't a single one size fits all. But I would say, as you mentioned, Terra, what I think is helpful is, you could consider putting it at the bottom. You could put it in professional experience or relevant experience, but wherever you put it, don't assume that your reader knows what Terra is. So when you say Terra, it's much more powerful if you say Terra, Learning for Action, Climate, full name of the course, but then explain that it is a 12-week, 8 to 10 hour a week course. And I think to explain just how in-depth the course is, I think is much more meaningful, and will help it land and ensure that a user understands what Terra is if they haven't heard of it. So I think that would be the general piece there. And explaining a recent break. So I think with Naresh, Terra could be in your resume in a section that is under relevant experience. It's a little less traditional and it's not a conventional sort of work experience, but it is very relevant in terms of education, training. And so I think that's a way you can do it. There's interest, open reviewing resumes one-on-one. I've seen, yeah, questions. Okay, we broke the ice. People are starting to ask the questions. Interest section, I think you absolutely can have a line at the bottom. So a personal sort of hobbies, language proficiency, memorable facts. I think I wouldn't devote too much space to this, just because I think having more space for impactful, relevant resume bullets will help. Will make more of an impact, but definitely can have some space. Reviewing resumes one-on-one. Yeah, I think feel free to Slack me. I am in the Terra community. I can't do an unlimited number of those, but if you catch me at the right time, I may be able to fit some of that in. And then Kato had a question. Can you talk more about finding measurable metrics? I found it difficult to find these numbers when you're doing a small part of a large scale project that's often pretty black box or proprietary. Yeah, great question. So I think, Kato, in a software engineering role, what I'd think about in quantification are things like how many other engineers were on this project, what was the total budget of the initiative, how much revenue or cost savings did the engineering work that you shipped ultimately drive. I think those are all ways that you can extrapolate from one piece of a project out to the broader impact. You'll know more about your specific context, but I think those are a couple of the ways. So connect the dots essentially from what you're doing to what a customer or client received in their value. Thoughts on a 2-page resume when one page doesn't quite fit? Yeah, I think 1 to 2 pages is reasonable. I think if you're a new grad with fewer than 2 years of experience, you really should be able to fit it into less space. But as you get more experience, going to something like 2 pages would be fine. Metrics may be secret. You work for a public company. Yeah, so I think when metrics are secret or covered by an NDA or something like that, I think what you can do is share a sense of the scale of the work. So number of people, number of clients that your product served, or if it's on the scale of millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions, being able to speak to that scale gives enough of a sense of what you did without revealing anything that is sensitive. The candidate portrait photo, that is a good question. I think this one also varies by geography. I think it's more common in European markets, I've understood, and in the US, it's generally less common. So I think I probably would defer to finding out what is the norm and convention where you are. I think in the US, it's not included, but yeah, in Europe, it's much more common. Do we shorten descriptions or lengthen the document? Andy, can you elaborate on what you mean there?
Yeah, sorry, that was in reference to the question above, just about 1 or 2 page resumes.
Yeah. So I think you don't sacrifice clarity and understanding for length. So I would make sure you can clearly explain what the company does or what your role was in the company. And that I think is more important than having it, perfectly be 1 page. Because if a reader doesn't understand what the company is or what your role is, having it shorter isn't going to help you. So I would say if you need a little bit of extra space and it flows over to 2, then yeah, that clarity is more important than having it in all cases fit to 1. Stephen, to explain time devoted to Terra, can we list that as experience so we can fill a time gap between roles? Yeah, I think you definitely could. You could put Terra, the start date, end dates. I think you'd want to flesh out, what was Terra, create bullets just like you would for a normal experience to speak to the hours committed or the assignments completed or the depth of understanding that you're able to achieve in different spaces. I've seen many photos. Okay, yeah, more photos. Okay, cool. Any other resume questions? We have still more on cover letter and we'll have more time for questions there, but any other burning resume questions before we continue? Yeah, climate focused experience, even if it isn't formal. Good question, Kato. So I think how I think about how much climate related experience you include on the resume is a bit of a balancing act. So I think if you have Terra and you've explained that it's a 100+ hour climate focused course, I think you've probably conveyed that you were serious about climate. But I think if you are maybe if you have cool personal projects relating to climate, or you've really done an extensive, read dozens of books and written up summaries of them, things like that, things that feel really incremental and distinct from Terra, you absolutely could include it. And I don't think there's any harm there. Is there a convention for filling up time gaps in the relevant experience sections? I have quite a few and most don't have a course travel similar. Yeah, I think on this part, Alberto, that's probably more specific. Feel free to maybe ping me with an example of what you have, and maybe I can speak to that a bit more. Wabbi is, what is the right way of choosing references you include and how many should they be ideally? Yeah, so I think you'll hear some different pieces on this. I think a US convention and what I've seen more frequently is that you don't actually need to include a section that has a lot of space for references, because one, the employer will always ask you for it if they want it. And so I think at least in a US context, it would be fine not to include this. Do have 2 to 3 references prepared of past managers and past colleagues who would speak highly of you, but I don't think it's strictly necessary to have it in all cases. Cool. Just being mindful of time, I'll start to move ahead to cover letters, but we can definitely come back more to resumes. Yeah. We'll keep on going and then we'll come back. So in terms of the cover letter, a few recommendations to consider are that one, to create a template that you can tailor, emphasis both on template and tailoring. Second tip here to consider is to lead with the value that you bring. This one is just like in the resume. And then third is to create reusable paragraphs. So creating this template, I'll sort of show you what I mean here with this example. But again, there's a cover letter template here that has, it's basically Mad Lib's fill in the blank style. But the reason this template is powerful is that it really makes it faster and easier to write tailored cover letters that don't take 2 hours per cover letter. So, this cover letter is largely, dear hiring manager, I'm interested in a position title in this position at company. As an experienced fill in the blank, I understand the challenges you're facing and the goals you're trying to achieve. So an initial paragraph to show you have relevant experience and understand the challenges. If you have a personal connection to the company's mission, you can mention it up top. And then the body of the resume is really, again, leans on telling a few relevant stories focused on the impact that you made. You'll see that keyword framing is shown here as well of, the keyword or relevant experience at this company. What did you do? How did you tackle it? What impact did you have? And these are the blurbs that, once you write once for one software engineering role, save it so that the next time you come across a similar one, you're able to tweak it and revise it instead of starting from scratch. Cool. Sharing templates. Yes, I can share that again here. Okay. But that is an example. And this is, an older cover letter for a product role at SurveyMonkey that I had applied for. But this is an example of, dear SurveyMonkey team, a few things where I allude to relevant experience that I have. And then as a candidate, I can immediately bring the following assets. So strong track record of driving growth as a PM and PMM. This is taken directly from the job description I was applying to, telling a story that is impact focused about what I did. And then a data-driven experimental approach. Again, keywords directly from the job description, a relevant story. And then I look forward to contributing my skills and experience. And I think these are just a couple of ways to scale your ability to write really tailored cover letters that fit with the roles you're applying to. Unable to find a appropriate hiring manager. Do you have a favorite greeting? Yeah. Yeah, I think I've been fine keeping it generic. So dear company name team is perfectly acceptable. These days, LinkedIn sleuthing can go a long way. But yeah, just something generic, dear so-and-so team is fine. The body of the cover letter is where it's really, really important though, to invest. Mary, do you have a question?
Hi, sorry, I joined late, so I don't know if this is something that was already covered. Any tips for someone? So I do not work in the climate space right now, did the course. Would you recommend that you kind of glaze over the fact that you haven't worked in the climate space specifically, or do you, like talk to that?
Yeah. So I think a good question. Thank you for joining, Mary. So I would say a couple things you can do around that is, one, everyone here is part of Terra. So I think incorporating that into your resume speaks to an interest and an investment that you've made in learning about the space. But number two, at least in the experience I've had and what I saw from my cohort mates, is that For many companies and roles, unless you're doing a research, PhD oriented role, what you can lead with, even though you haven't worked in climate per se, is the functional expertise that you bring. And so we did cover this earlier in the session, but being able to incorporate keywords from the job description that speak to, if you're a software engineer, your coding ability, or if you're a data person, the analytics chops that you bring, or biz dev. So leaning into the functional expertise you have, I think, is how you put your best foot forward, while also incorporating Terra to show the interest and the investment you've spent in the climate space. So that would be my recommendation, because many people in Terra don't come from 10 years of I've worked at Rocky Mountain Institute on climate, but that is perfectly fine. And in my interviews at climate tech companies, being able to speak to what I learned in Terra, how extensive it was, and obviously reading the chapter that is most relevant to the company that you're applying to was way more than enough to sort of check the box and prove that I'm serious about climate and the space. Any other questions on cover letters or resumes? Next section is figuring out where you fit in climate. Thank you for the question, Mary. Cool. Is there anything here? How do you approach overlap between info in the resume and the cover letter? Telling stories about impact. Yeah. So I think there will be some overlap in stories you might share in a cover letter and the resume bullets. I generally view the cover letter as an opportunity to, one, elaborate a lot more, and two, to speak to more of a mission connection. So I think many within this sort of cover letter, a good balance might be the first two body paragraphs are speaking to impactful experiences, professional experiences you've had, but having the third one be maybe more about a personal project or your personal connection to the mission of the organization, I think can be a nice way to add some variety and differentiate a bit the content between the resume and the cover letter. I think many climate tech companies are obviously mission oriented, and being able to convey that is helpful. Cool. We'll move ahead to figuring out where you fit in climate. Feel free to, again, interrupt if you have any questions, but sort of 4 recommendations in this space are, one is this Japanese concept of ikigai, finding sort of the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. A recommendation on focusing your search and why that's beneficial, and a couple of other thoughts around climate levers or buckets to help narrow your search, and questions to hopefully probing questions to help you find the right company that fits what you're looking for. So tip number 1, ikigai. There's a lot of good articles on this, but essentially this is more of a reflective exercise in thinking through, what do you enjoy doing? What are you good at? What have colleagues shared that are your strengths? What can you get paid for? What are the fastest growing roles, functions, industries within the climate space? And what does the world need in terms of actually making a difference in solving climate change? There's a lot more people with expertise in this, but would just encourage you to do a quick search of ikigai to start with some of this reflection. But then tip number 2 is that it's really important, and it's a little counterintuitive, but focusing your search is really important in that it makes it easier and faster for you to actually learn the space, the language and trends, develop confidence in a space, build up a network, apply to many jobs, and practice for interviews. This is maybe illustrated well with an example of, if you are applying for a software engineering role, a product role, and a data analyst role, those interviews are meaningfully different. The resumes and cover letters you prepare are meaningfully different, and you have limited time. And so it's actually much more helpful to focus and pick, a fewer, smaller set of things, so you can develop the expertise and scale your sort of job search efforts within one area as opposed to spreading yourself too thin. It also makes it easier for others to help you if they know that they know that Eric is only looking at product roles in software climate companies. That's a narrower field than Eric is looking at product, data, or whatever you want roles in too broad a set of spaces. So focus your search. And in terms of how to focus your search, these are a couple of dimensions that I think can help, because I think Terra is great in giving a broad overview, but actually figuring out, okay, what does that mean in terms of my job search? It can be daunting. And so a few ways you can segment your search are around tech risk. So is the technology of this company or organization proven to work at scale in the real world? The market risk is another key dimension. So is there significant traction in terms of revenue, climate impact, customers, et cetera? Which lever in the climate space does this target? Is it about emitting less, sequestering, or adapting to the impacts of climate change? And then by sector, by organization type, the size and stage of the company, if you're looking at startups, the functional role, the product type. So I think between all of these dimensions, you don't need to use all of them, but I would encourage certainly the first three can be very powerful. And the tech risks, market risk are from conversations with climate VCs and essentially a simplification of some of the frameworks and approaches they use. Because ideally you want to, as a job seeker, look for companies that have technology that is proven to work at scale and that also have product market fit and significant traction, because the size of the climate problem is quite significant. Obviously, if you have a different risk profile or you are a PhD and you can evaluate tech risk differently, this applies a little differently to you. But here are a few ways to focus your search. And I'll pause here. Any questions before I continue ahead? So far it's Ikigai, focus your search, here's why, and here's a few segmentations to help you focus. Okay, we'll continue ahead then. Well, so then this gets a little bit into some personal biases I have. So this isn't Terra officially sponsored, but I think as I was doing my job search earlier this year and thinking through the three broad climate buckets of mitigation, sequestration, and adaptation, my lens and bias on this was that how I prioritized was mitigation and then adaptation and then sequestration for a couple of reasons. So one is just in terms of size of the climate solution. We obviously need all of these to come through, but as a single person doing a job search, I wanted to focus on maximizing impact and certainty of impact. So mitigation is a bigger part of the problem. It is a little more certain in terms of the impact you can have. The immediacy of it is a little nearer term. The permanence of it is a little less risky and uncertain. And there's just fewer market and tech risks. And so given those dimensions, the mitigation path was where it felt like a natural area to focus. And so if you're trying to figure out between some of these, this is one way to look at it. Certainly not the only way. And Terra has chapters covering all of these. We will need all of these. But if you are having trouble narrowing things down, my personal view is that I think in the mitigation space, there's, I think, a lot of promise and opportunity and advantages to consider. Job board recs besides Terra and Climatebase. Yeah, so Terra, Climatebase, I would say all of the climate communities I would make sure you're a part of. So that's My Climate Journey. I think there's around 1,000 to 2,000 people in that. There's a job board there. There is Work on Climate. I think that is the biggest climate community. And these are all, Slack communities that have these channels. I think generally it's It's not, sometimes it is a numbers game, but I think between any 2 or 3 of these job boards, you'd probably be able to find some dozens of jobs to apply to, if not more. And so you do need enough quantity, but from there in your job search, it's actually about making sure your conversions from first application to phone screen to first interview and all of that are working effectively. But I think there are quite a few jobs to find. Yeah, you're welcome, Hannah. Cool. Next up, I think business and climate incentives, I think, are another area to probe in as you're doing a search. So I think this is not easy, not always easy to find, but I think if you can find a company where business and climate incentives are aligned, you're more likely to achieve the goals of solving climate change and thriving in your career. So are incentives aligned? Is the climate impact proven at scale, certain, immediate, and permanent? I think those are high bars, but I think when you're starting out in a search, aim for and aspire for what you for many of these things. And then I think an equity lens, I think, is also important in that having community representation is likely to make the solutions better tailored to driving impact and serving more vulnerable folks who will be affected by climate change. Yeah. And last but not least, there's obviously many climate opportunities outside of for-profit organizations. A lot of my experience has been in tech and for-profit, but broad range of opportunities here. And I will pause here and see if there's any questions on finding where you fit in climate. Professional resume writers focusing on climate. Laura, good questions. I've not used professional resume writers much myself. I think you could look into it. I know Terra has a Google Doc of essentially climate career coaches that they are aware of. I think that might be a good place to start. The other thing I'd say is it's probably not strictly necessary to find I think it's more important to find a well-reviewed, very capable resume writer than it is to find someone who has the climate expertise per se, because the principles of how you write a powerful resume can be applied flexibly to different industries. So I would say maybe find a good resume writer and or start with the climate coach document that I think Terra had shared at least when I was going through the course. And hopefully that's something they are still able to share. And if not, I can dig it up from when I was in the course. Well, last but not least, setting up a sustainable job search process. Nope, is there anything else? Okay. Don't do the left side, do the right side. This is a little flippant, but how not to do a job search is you're doing it alone. You're sending 20 apps a week. You're applying nonstop. You're not doing networking calls. You're not learning and practicing, and you're focusing on every rejection. Do a job search, approach a job search like a really balanced nutritional diet. So get help from a broad network of friends, family, cohort mates, and colleagues. Send out a few apps each week so it's sustainable and you're not burning out. Take breaks. Aim for networking calls so that you're learning and as you are applying, and through these networking calls, getting insight into, okay, what is actually happening at some of these climate tech companies? How do I apply it? Learn, read, and practice, and focus on the process and small wins. And that is pretty much it. Okay, look at that. There's someone who's a career coach, whose husband is a career coach on the call. Very cool. So that is a wrap for some of the content we have for today, and have the rest of the time for any and all questions. We can step through any of these topics, and floor is open. Feel free to raise your hand, continue using chat, whatever you feel comfortable with. Kato, what are your thoughts on applying to a posted job versus cold emailing a company for opportunities? That cold emailing can show a more genuine interest. Yeah, I think my thoughts there are that when there's a company that I'm interested in, my order of operations is step one, do I know anyone at the company that I can reach out to, either first, second order LinkedIn connection? Can I get an introduction? If so, that's always my first preference, is to get referred in if I can. Secondly, if I can't do that, you can absolutely try, Kato, what you said of cold emailing to show genuine interest and or applying. I've actually, what you could try is actually experiment with both approaches. So take a data-driven approach where you have some of the companies where you're doing the cold emailing and some of the companies where you're applying directly, and then track how you are, the success you have. And I think that will give you, I think, some good actionable data. I've not done as much of the cold emailing myself, but I definitely have heard of folks doing that. And so would suggest to, try that out, track how those approaches are performing for you, and invest more in the one that seems to be delivering more results. Lateral career move, Gustav. Advice for attempting to make a lateral career move, or example, from marketing to product development. Yeah, good question. So this is good question, because I actually made a similar move. So I went from consulting to marketing at Khan Academy to then product management, where I've been for the last many years. A couple ways to think about lateral career moves are, one, trying to do it at your current company. So I think that is one of the more common ways to do this, because at your current company, people know you, you've hopefully proven yourself, and it's easier to know how to position yourself next to, say, product or the roles that you and projects that you want to do. So do it at your current company is one method. The second one is to invest in education alongside a job search. So organizations like Reforge, Product School, these are all more product oriented. So going to specialty schools that can give you a certification or networking access to folks in that function is another way. A third option is to do side projects that are oriented in that demonstrate the functional expertise that you are trying to move towards. And a fourth way is to consider startups. So I think startups will sometimes be a little bit more flexible in considering folks who have a variety of experiences and are less traditional, whereas bigger companies tend to want to see more, hey, do you have 5 to X years of this product experience? Suggested approach to following up with people within the company after application. Yeah, so I think, Andy, good question. There's some of this that actually starts before you even submit the application, because ideally, if you have first or second degree LinkedIn connections, try to reach out through that first, and you can ping 2 to 3 folks at the company to see if there are any bites, tweak your subject lines, try and get in that way. If you can't, then you can do the application, and then it'd be fine to reach out to the hiring manager or recruiters at the company with a short LinkedIn message or email expressing your interest and enthusiasm in the role and why you think you would make an excellent candidate, to sort of boost your odds a little bit. But in both the upfront outreach and in the follow-ups, make sure you're being tactful and don't overdo it or pester too many people or send too many pings. Do you think there are enough remote jobs available in this space today? I think COVID has transformed a lot of things. But I think enough will depend on your country, your function, the exact industry you're looking for. I do think across my climate journey, Terra, Climatebase, these job boards, there are filters for location, remote, and so filter by that and as you prioritize your job search, start with, if you're looking for remote, apply to the remote jobs, and then work your way through to try and land one of those. Any other questions or comments around climate job search? Lena is asking, is it usually a norm to compromise on the pay package or position in case of transition from some role that you have experience in to climate? Yeah. Lena, are you staying in the same functional role, but just changing from non-climate to a climate industry?
Yes, that, and also the function, because I've been into marketing and climate is completely different to what I have been doing till now.
Got it. So you're staying in marketing, but the industry part is changing. I'd say doesn't necessarily need to be the norm. So for example, my product career has primarily been in education technology, and then I moved into climate technology. And I think you don't, let me be more definitive. No, is the answer to your question. So I think always lead with confidence in the functional expertise that you have, and believe that you would be able to pick up the domain expertise around climate to complement your marketing expertise. Don't go in and assume that you would have to take a 10 to 15 or 20% pay bump because you don't have exactly all the industry specific experience. Because I think with Terra, with being proactive in learning the climate space, that I think can more than enough, can definitely complement the marketing chops that you would bring. If the market is telling you and you're just getting job offers that are all a little bit lower than what you expect, then that's a good data point, but don't go in assuming or asking for less because you're making this industry transition. Stan, Terra's next course bootcamp will be in November. Is there other climate online course that can be a good certification to be added to the CV? Hasini, I think I'd probably ask your Terra cohort for that, because I think crowdsourcing that sort of information and referrals and recommendations that way would probably be better. I've done Terra's the main one that I've done, but I can't speak to quite as many other ones. How would you communicate that you were laid off from your most recent job and that's part of why you were looking for a new job? Yeah, good question. I think some of that will depend on the nature of the layoffs. So Gustav, is there any other, well, I guess I'm sure there's a lot in there, but I think a few principles around it are, I think you can share if there's external drivers of a layoff. So company didn't secure funding or COVID impacts, like all of those things I think are fairly understandable and reasonable external factors that you can weave into your story. In any case, I don't think there's a need to dwell or go into extensive detail there. You can briefly say, I was laid off. Here's the general brief context as to why, but I'm excited to be exploring opportunities in this space and think I bring these strengths. And so I don't think it's an area you need to dwell super long on, especially in a COVID era where turnover and transitions are just more common in general. Gustav, for that follow-up question, I wouldn't actually, your resume will show when you have, I would basically do it in the interview and only if you're asked. I don't think there's a need to proactively bring it up yourself on that one. If there's a company whose work you're interested in, but they do not have a listed role, would you still find it advantageous to reach out? Yeah, absolutely. I think having more irons in the fire, proactively reaching out to say, hey, so what I would do there if there's a company is find the recruiting manager or head of the department that you're most interested in, reach out to that person and share some of your strengths and background. And if you have an idea based on research into the company around, here's what they might be working on. Here's a role that you think you would be a good fit for. Pitch that so that it's not just, oh, who is this person? Make it easy for them to have something to react to. So, oh, here's Andy. He brings a biz dev set of experience, and he's interested in helping us grow our revenues or whatever that is. So absolutely fine to reach out and just make it easy for the person to react and say yes. Cool. Any other questions or comments? And Ishita, anything you need to do before we, as we get to the tail end of this?
I did want to take a poll if everyone is okay with it. I'm just going to put it out now just to get some feedback on this session. So everyone just please take like a minute to respond to this. And other than that, nothing from my end. Thank you for the session. It was really, really good. And I hope everyone else enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a recording will be shared. And here again is the slides in case it is helpful. It's always interesting as the presenter, I also see this poll and am asked to rate myself. So I will not do that and leave it in y'all's good hands. Great. Well, thank you all very much for joining and attending today. Hopefully some parts were useful. I am in the Terra community, so if you have follow-up questions or comments or want to talk to me one-on-one, feel free to reach out. I can't, in all cases, do one-on-one resume reviews for everyone, but I'm able to fit some in here and there. So yeah, hopefully this was helpful, and have a good rest of your day and week.
Thank you, Eric, for taking the time out. I'm just going to end the meeting here.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.